Metaphilosophy asks what philosophy actually is. Most view it as a museum of dead ideas. But take the seemingly simple goal of trying to make one good choice today. To make a good choice, you first need a reliable way to separate facts from assumptions. That foundational layer is epistemology. But clear thinking alone isn't enough. You have to apply that thinking to the actual physical reality you inhabit, which requires a second layer of cosmology. Only then can you accurately map how your actions affect other people, demanding a third support layer of ethics. And since we aren't isolated agents, your individual ethics will fail if you ignore the massive political and economic systems you operate inside. These aren't arbitrary academic subjects. They form a strict structural dependency chain. Neglect any foundational layer and your ability to live well collapses. The ultimate purpose of building this sequence isn't endless armchair contemplation. It's to properly orient your first principles so you can safely return to living. And that single daily choice from the very beginning, it is simply the final output of a complete human operating manual.
Beginner's mind helps you see the world with fresh eyes, but how do you override your own expertise? As we grow up, life feels mundane because your brain prioritizes energy efficiency over exploration. Take that normal tree in your front yard that you walk past every single day. During your first encounter, your brain fully renders the complex details and floods your system with dopamine. But eventually, to save mental energy, it compresses that familiar tree into a simple, low-effort label. Here's the hidden trap. Your brain's dopamine reward system goes dormant for predictable things, so we literally stop seeing the physical object in front of us, leaving only a mental shortcut. Beginner's mind is the deliberate intervention against this process. It's the conscious act of intercepting that cognitive filter, refusing to let a real encounter harden instantly into a pre-packaged label. This practice doesn't erase your hard-won adult knowledge. Instead, it forces your brain to hold two states at once, maintaining a deep structural understanding of the object while forcing the perceptual filter fully open. So that front yard tree, instead of an invisible background object, it expands back into a living structure you can actually experience. We are drowning in endless information, but how do you actually know what you think you know? To separate signal from noise, we have to look at the architecture of human knowledge. It starts with observation. You see an apple fall repeatedly, and you induce a general rule: gravity. That's induction. Deduction runs in reverse, applying that general rule to a new specific apple. But when you lack a rule, you use abduction, the creative guess. You see wet footprints in a hallway and logically infer that it's raining. Yet facts alone are meaningless. Think of a wooden chess pawn. By itself, it's just carved wood. Its power depends on the board. This is structuralism. Information only gains meaning through its connections. Once you build this structure, you test it using falsifiability. To be scientific, an idea must have a theoretical way to prove it wrong. For concepts beyond physical testing, we use metaphysics and idealism. Imagine a blueprint for an unbuilt chair. The physical object doesn't exist, but the organizing pattern does, giving thought a sandbox to explore reality. In a sea of noise, collecting facts isn't the superpower. The true superpower is organizing and testing them to build a framework that makes sense. How did our massive universe emerge from absolute nothingness? Forget the Big Bang. What if everything was created by quantum vacuum fluctuations? The secret is virtual particles. To understand them, imagine a confined glass box. Now, remove every single physical atom inside it. You are left with a perfect vacuum. Because this fabric of nothingness has zero resistance, it requires zero effort to move, meaning it spontaneously ripples on its own. It behaves like pure math. The zero state of the vacuum splits into perfectly mirrored positive peaks and negative dips, so it always equals zero. Normally, these random ripples just cancel each other out, but occasionally multiple positive peaks and negative dips randomly align. This overlap magnifies their intensity into concentrated, localized vibrations. When they cross a threshold, these vibrations snap into physical matter.
They become a paired positive and negative entity, like an electron and a positron. They emerge with exact opposite charge, opposite momentum, and opposite spin. So the universe's total ledger never actually deviates from zero. And that completely empty glass box from the beginning, it is actually a boiling, turbulent field of transient matter, constantly borrowing existence from nothing. But over infinite time, these pairs compound and overlap. They form an unimaginably massive, outward bursting fountain, a white hole. When this flood of particles erupts, perfect symmetry breaks down due to statistical inevitability. The surviving matter is left behind to form our universe. These white holes also repel space-time outward from deep cosmic voids. That outward stretching effect is what we call dark energy. But eventually, this expansion stops and the white holes die. The stretched waves of remaining matter will slowly drift back together, meeting with so little energy that they perfectly cancel out. Everything we know quietly returns to absolute zero, because the entire universe is just a temporary equation, inevitably balancing itself out. Atheist, agnostic, anti-theist. People use these words interchangeably, but they actually map out three entirely different positions on evidence, psychology, and human knowledge. First up, atheism isn't the bold claim that no gods exist. It's simply the absence of belief. You don't have to disprove a ceramic teapot orbiting the sun to not believe in it. That puts the burden of proof entirely on the person making the claim. Next, agnosticism. This isn't about what you believe, it's a measure of what you claim to know. An agnostic atheist lacks belief, but admits absolute certainty is impossible. This completely shatters the myth that agnostics are just indecisive fence-sitters. Third, anti-theism. This is the conviction that religion is an actively destructive force. The danger is faith itself. When belief demands acceptance without evidence, it destroys the very mechanism a society needs to correct its own errors. Finally, why do we believe at all? It's a survival reflex from the ancient savanna. An ancestor who mistook the wind for a lion survived. The opposite mistake was fatal. We evolved to see intention in random patterns, and organized religion built an empire on that instinct. The true opposite of faith isn't just passively doubting, it's the active, evidence-based pursuit of certainty. The universe doesn't hand you a cosmic script for your life's purpose, and society's demand that you just invent one usually leads straight to paralysis. But consider a choice. If forced, would you sacrifice your own city today to guarantee the survival of the human species in the future? Most say yes. That instinct isn't just a philosophical preference. It's a biological drive, wired into your DNA by billions of years of evolution. Biologically, our internal hierarchy is built on one foundation. Your deepest, most powerful evolutionary drive is to serve the species. Only once the species is secure does our secondary drive kick in, cooperating with and protecting your local community. At the very top, with the lowest biological priority, is serving yourself. But modern culture loudly demands the exact opposite. It hijacks our biology, pushing personal status and consumption above all else. This upside-down prioritization is the root of our existential paralysis. We're forcing a lifestyle that fundamentally contradicts our own evolutionary wiring. So existential freedom doesn't mean inventing a new purpose out of thin air. It's about stripping away the cultural noise and reconnecting with the biological hierarchy you were already born with. And that instinct to save humanity over a single city, you didn't have to invent it. That is your true biological purpose. Utilitarianism tells us to maximize the greatest good, but its core software always crashes because it tries to calculate happiness. How do you mathematically weigh the deep satisfaction of finishing a life's work against eating chocolate? There is no common currency, making this equation impossible to solve. To fix the glitch, we have to change the ultimate target the system is trying to hit, what programmers call the objective function. So we swap out the immeasurable goal of happiness for a concrete target, maximizing the probability of humanity reaching its ultimate evolutionary potential. This one patch fixes everything. We stop measuring subjective feelings and start calculating statistical probabilities. Under this new calculus, acts like lying or stealing are no longer just abstract sins.
They are literal computational errors that mathematically destroy the trust required for progress. So morality stops being a set of ancient rules and becomes an intelligent equation we can actually run. Which means that gut feeling you get when a decision just feels fundamentally wrong is simply your biology's internal calculator flagging a behavioral pattern with a terrible probability of success. Society claims to value sustainability, health, and compassion, but our global food system actively contradicts all three. We are living a massive collective lie across 4 pillars. First, the environment. Animal agriculture is a mathematical disaster. We lose massive amounts of energy converting plant protein into animal protein. Livestock hogs 83% of global farmland, but yields just 18% of our calories. Eating animals is arguably the largest driver of our planetary crisis. Next, human health. The medical consensus is completely clear. Major nutrition organizations confirm plant-based diets are fully sufficient for all life stages. They actively slash the risk of heart disease and cancer. The hard truth? We don't physically need animals to thrive. Third, the hidden cost. This industrial machine demands systemic suffering for billions of sentient beings, but it breaks humans too. Slaughterhouse workers face severe psychological trauma and PTSD. Finally, our psychology. We feel intense mental discomfort holding conflicting beliefs, a reaction called cognitive dissonance. We use tradition as a shield, creating a society of complete hypocrisy. Self-proclaimed animal lovers blindly fund systemic abuse at the grocery store. Going vegan isn't just a personal dietary preference anymore. It is the single best way to stop funding a broken system that demands we lie to ourselves. Classical conditioning shapes our behavior, but how does it actively suppress independent thought? Society used to formally execute its philosophers just to maintain the illusion of stability. Today, it's much quieter. Take a child at a family dinner who points out a glaring hypocrisy. They observe reality and expect a logical, positive response for simply telling the truth. Instead, the room responds with raised eyebrows, dismissive laughter, and quiet discouragement. Over time, the brain mechanically links the act of honesty with the sensation of immediate social pain. That associative rewiring is the exact mechanism of classical conditioning. Eventually, the external enforcers aren't even needed. The policing of thought migrates inward, causing you to preemptively doubt your own perception of reality. By adulthood, this feedback loop is fully entrenched. You choose the safety of group consensus over the friction of independent clarity. So the next time you feel that heavy, anxious hesitation right before speaking an unpopular opinion in a crowded room, remember that hesitation isn't your personality. It is simply a conditioned reflex designed to keep you quiet. The stoic dichotomy of control promises radical personal agency, because right now you burn vital mental energy trying to command external events you cannot change. Take a sudden, completely unexpected layoff from a job you love. The initial shock of that firing is completely unavoidable, but your brain naturally amplifies that initial hit into a paralyzing secondary panic about the future. Here is where the stoic filter steps into the gap. It instantly forces that crisis into 2 distinct pathways. Up top is what you cannot control, the company's decision. Down below is what you can, your internal judgment of the event. Stoics treat that top pathway as an absolute physical boundary. It restricts your options, but it cannot damage your character. A constraint Stoics call an indifferent. Because you refuse to burn cognitive bandwidth resisting this reality, all your mental capacity is aggressively rerouted to the bottom pathway, so you can focus entirely on your next immediate move. And what about that sudden, unexpected layoff that felt so crushing just moments ago? The grief passes, leaving only total, unshakable clarity on the next move you need to make. How do 86 billion neurons firing in the dark create the subjective experience of being you? It comes down to the architecture of cognition, specifically 3 competing systems at the top of your brain. Your logic center for solving structured problems is called the central executive network. Your empathy center, where you build narratives and daydream, is the default mode network. And the switchboard that monitors the environment and decides which mode takes control is the salience network.
But your brain can't run both the logic and empathy networks at full power simultaneously. Because of this electrical friction, you develop a hardwired preference over your lifetime. This is what Myers-Briggs maps. Default to the executive network, you're a thinker. Default to empathy, you're a feeler. If Myers-Briggs is your static cognitive engine, the Big Five model is your fluid behavioral dashboard. It measures how those exact same physical networks react to your current environment. For example, the trait of agreeableness is just the observable behavioral output of your empathy network in action. Ultimately, you are the continuous result of a hardwired biological engine that forms your deep static cognitive foundation, and that engine drives a highly flexible behavioral dashboard, continuously reacting and adapting to the changing world around you.
Society often treats queer and unconventional identities as modern deviations from the norm, but the evidence proves otherwise. Here is a 4-part breakdown of why diversity is fundamental to human nature. First up, evolution. Historically, adults without kids dedicated extra resources to their nieces and nephews. This mechanism, called kin selection, ensured the family's survival. Humanity thrived because of them. Next, biology. In the womb, chemical switches turn genes on or off without altering your DNA. This process, epigenetics, rewires the brain. A person's neurological gender identity can develop independent of their chromosomes. Third, history. Fluid identities were widely accepted across ancient and indigenous cultures for millennia. Global homophobia is actually a manufactured legacy of European empires who exported strict binary laws across their colonies. Finally, psychology. A baby's brain desperately seeks comfort. If missing, it latches onto alternative sensory constants instead, like a comforting cartoon. Subcultures like furries or adult baby roleplay provide harmless frameworks to recreate that security. Punishing people who don't fit the mold doesn't protect society. It suffocates the exact biological diversity that builds our civilization. People treat planning like it's just a sophisticated form of procrastination. But building a system isn't avoiding work, it's designing the operating system of your agency. We wait for motivation to strike, but motivation is unpredictable weather, and willpower is biologically exhausting. Your real enemy isn't laziness, it's environmental friction. If your room is chaotic, you'll postpone starting forever. The fix is architectural. Since human working memory is a terrible place to store life, you must externalize your intentions onto a single master checklist to eliminate decision fatigue. Running this requires 3 mental modes. First, the engineer builds the daily plan. Next, the operator mindlessly executes that routine. Finally, the steward notices when a routine goes stale and decides when to switch gears. But what happens when your energy crashes? You deploy a failsafe. Scale your behavior down to a single stretch or sentence, surviving the day without breaking the chain. When this system fails, the symptoms are obvious, like late-night doom scrolling. This isn't a lack of sleep discipline, it's a desperate hunger to reclaim the autonomy you were denied all day, which reveals the ultimate paradox of architecting your life. Structured planning doesn't kill your freedom, it creates the safety and empty space required for true spontaneity and play. How does a system called cognitive architecture manage to bypass human willpower entirely? Most of us fail at building habits because we rely on motivation, which fluctuates wildly, instead of eliminating friction. Take a typical morning routine: waking up, hydrating, stretching, and sitting down to work. If you treat these as an isolated checklist, every single item requires its own separate internal debate. Because the heaviest friction in any task isn't the physical effort of doing it, it's the cognitive startup cost of deciding how and when to begin. You bypass this by focusing on the link between tasks instead of the tasks themselves. Building this cognitive architecture turns isolated actions into a connected sequence, where your next move is inherited directly from the previous one, skipping the decision phase entirely. So finishing your water physically triggers the stretch, and finishing the stretch automatically triggers opening your planner. To keep this chain from breaking on low energy days, you build in a tiny, instantly executable version of each task, like doing just one single stretch. And that ambitious morning sequence, you execute the entire chain smoothly before your half-awake brain even has the chance to argue. Democracy is a project we haven't given a major structural update in centuries, leaving us vulnerable to the two-party trap and systemic corruption. But here is the blueprint for a complete digital upgrade. First up, a national civic platform. It's an app where citizens propose policies, experts provide evidence, and the public votes directly. This uses modern tech to solve both ancient voter ignorance and modern unresponsiveness. Next, the digital recall button. Traditional elections remain, but casting your ballot unlocks your app access. This creates constant accountability, letting you revoke a failing politician's power without waiting years for the next election. Third, democracy dollars. To end corporate lobbying, the government issues equal financial vouchers to every citizen. This keeps campaign money in politics, but the source completely shifts, from massive corporations putting that power right back into the hands of ordinary people. Finally, mandatory civic education. Because a democracy is only as smart as its voters, the platform requires civic tutorials during onboarding. Blaming a system for uninformed voters misses the point. Education is the essential ingredient to make this work. These components aren't optional add-ons. Together, they transform democracy from a passive spectator sport into a daily active skill, and the technology to build it is already sitting right in your pocket.
How does universal IP compensation justify funding society without being another tax? Because modern wealth isn't built from scratch. It relies on thousands of years of unpaid human discoveries. Take a tech company making billions with AI. They didn't invent the underlying math or data that makes it possible. If you visualize their value, the vast majority of their profit relies entirely on that public domain layer, rather than their own unique addition. So the system applies a baseline licensing fee to their profits, paying society for using that shared foundation. The company keeps the remaining share, preserving a massive incentive to keep building. But wait, if companies face a huge fee, doesn't that destroy their motivation to invent new things? No, the framework actively rewards true creation with targeted tax reductions for specific, demonstrable new discoveries, added to the top of the stack. This is called an innovation credit. Instead of disappearing into government bureaucracy, that collected fee bypasses the red tape and flows directly to citizens as a universal shareholder dividend to fund baseline survival. So what about that massive tech company's AI breakthrough from the very beginning? Instead of displacing the public, the unimaginable profits generated from our shared data directly fund your universal dividend.
Our shared sense of reality is dissolving before our eyes because the actual infrastructure of our information is fundamentally rigged. It started when traditional journalism tied its survival to profit. Predatory hedge funds bought up local newspapers and gutted them for cash. This created vast news deserts, entire communities left with no reporters. Without them, local government accountability just evaporates. Then, the digital attention economy supercharged this decay. Algorithms are designed to monetize your time, not inform you. In a fight for engagement, an engineered emotional lie will always beat the boring truth. Addicted to this model, the press fell into a negativity trap. By obsessively covering crises, they ignore the people building actual solutions. This creates a massive cultural leadership vacuum, which demagogues are eager to fill. To fix this, we must sever the link between outrage and profit. We have to ban predatory behavioral ad networks entirely. Instead, we build a single nationalized ad marketplace. That revenue would directly fund real public interest reporting. A free press is the immune system of a democracy, but until it stops serving the market, it will always choose a profitable lie over an unprofitable truth.
Modern schools are still running on a 19th century factory model built to churn out identical products, but a radical new blueprint aims to rebuild education around 4 core pillars. First, the classroom gets flipped. Foundational lectures move entirely online, and the physical school transforms into an interactive science center. Instead of sitting quietly, students spend their days building structures and running hands-on experiments. Next, artificial deadlines are replaced by a digital lanyard. This app tracks mastery, letting students visibly level up as they prove they understand the material. Education becomes a highly satisfying, self-paced progression. Third, control over the curriculum is stripped from government bureaucrats. Instead, a voting body of actual domain experts, like PhD mathematicians, decides what gets taught. Every topic must prove its utility, exactly how it helps a student navigate the real world. Finally, why does this model constantly lack funding? Because children are the only major demographic that cannot vote, lobby, or strike.
They compete against powerful adult interests, relying entirely on an adult conscience that often arrives late. By combining interactive spaces, gamified mastery, and expert curriculums, school stops being an industrial processing plant. It becomes society's ultimate engine for cultivating sharper, braver, and much more fully alive human beings.
Looking for a job today feels like an endless, soul-crushing marathon. But what if that pain is just bad design? Here is a concrete blueprint for a humane labor market. Today's system runs on friction, overflowing with fake ghost jobs. Desperate applicants are even hiding invisible text on resumes to trick automated AI bouncers. The foundation of this blueprint is an unbreakable financial floor that guarantees your survival, universal basic income. When the panic of poverty vanishes, trials prove people actually don't stop working. It just forces employers to genuinely compete for them. On that uncoerced floor, hiring becomes a free digital public matching app. You build a living profile with no resume gaps to apologize for. Matching is mutual, and transparent AI acts as a referee, blocking discriminatory filters. Because contracts live on a public ledger, your benefits backpack follows you, not your boss. Taxes are automatically filed in the background, and unpaid care work is finally recognized as valuable, quantifiable labor. So that exhausted job seeker, they can swipe to accept a plain language contract with a hard-coded right to disconnect that physically blocks terminal email fatigue on a Sunday night.
The US spends more per person on healthcare than any other country, yet we live shorter, sicker lives. This isn't a lack of medical talent, it's a flawed system design that requires a new 4-pillar blueprint. Pillar 1, changing how we pay. Right now, hospitals use fee-for-service, profiting from the sheer volume of tests and appointments. We need a shift to value-based care, where providers receive bundled payments based on whether the patient actually recovers. Second, clinical AI. Instead of replacing doctors with cold, isolated algorithms, AI should act as a background assistant to catch hidden patterns, deliberately freeing up the doctor for face-to-face empathy. Third, fixing prescription drugs. Taxpayers heavily fund the underlying basic science through government research labs, but when private companies patent those discoveries and set monopoly prices, the public is forced to pay twice at the pharmacy. Finally, mental health. Treating the mind as a separate, luxury specialty completely ignores human biology. We must integrate mental health screening directly into routine primary care to achieve true holistic health. We already have the data in the blueprint. Building a system that prioritizes human survival over profit is our choice.
What if a courtroom's true purpose isn't punishment, but repair? Welcome to the restorative paradigm. Because right now, traditional courts operate like a contest, where wealth usually wins. Let's fix it. Imagine an employee is accused of stealing from a local business. In our current adversarial model, this triggers a resource-heavy tug-of-war. Lawyers actively hide information from each other, just to win the battle. The restorative paradigm redesigns this entire pipeline, starting with an open file investigation. All evidence is pooled into one shared document, so the objective truth cannot be hidden. Next, the courtroom environment itself shifts from an intimidating battleground into an egalitarian space. The accused can speak freely without a judge's fear tactics suppressing the facts. But here is the system's vital sequence lock. Fact-finding must be completely finished and isolated before any discussion of sentencing can begin. Once the facts are verified, the pipeline moves to the final output module. Instead of a prison cell engineered for suffering, the sentence is strictly designed to rehabilitate the offender. So what exactly happens to that stolen money from the local business? The business gets full restitution, the employee gets rehabilitated, and the system actually repairs the harm. Prisons are supposed to make our communities safer, but the U.S. system has a staggering 77% rearrest rate within 5 years. So what does the hard data say actually stops crime? Here are 4 proven strategies. First, pure punishment fails because it actively worsens the trauma, addiction, and poverty that drive criminal behavior. Instead, the data points to addressing root causes and helping people build a totally new identity, not just inflicting pain.
Second, correctional education offers a massive financial return. For every single dollar spent on education inside, taxpayers save $5 in future reincarceration costs. Third, Norway proves the power of making life inside resemble life outside. Replacing concrete cells with natural light rooms and training guards as mentors yields a radically low 20% reconviction rate. Finally, the highest risk period for reoffending is the first 72 hours after release. This means securing housing and a job must happen before release because no amount of therapy can compensate for homelessness. Ultimately, a system that fails 77% of the time is what actually guarantees more victims down the road. Being truly tough on crime doesn't mean maximizing suffering, it means treating the root causes so there are fewer victims tomorrow. Global reparations seem mathematically impossible, with a bill in the tens of trillions. But a framework called a civilizational mortgage actually solves the math. Take a look at Britain's 1835 slavery loan. They took out one of history's largest public debts, not to help the enslaved, but to compensate the slave owners. But they didn't pay it all at once. They spread the payments out across 5 generations of taxpayers until it was quietly finished in 2015. Now look at the actual debt owed to colonized and enslaved peoples. Just for U.S. slavery alone, one estimate sits at $19 trillion. If we tried to write a single check for that today, it would instantly crater the global economy. But the civilizational mortgage framework changes the math. Instead of one impossible lump sum, we restructure it into a 2 to 500-year payment plan. By dedicating a tiny, fixed percentage of annual GDP to a global fund, the yearly burden becomes so small it's absorbed invisibly by normal economic growth. Britain quietly paid off a morally backward debt across 5 generations, over nearly 2 centuries. By applying a civilizational mortgage today, we can finally stamp the honest account as paid in full. The time tax rations public benefits, but how does waiting actually filter people out? Governments use it to quietly deny guaranteed entitlements without ever changing the law. Take a working parent who just needs to renew their food stamps. They must find a hidden portal, decipher confusing jargon, and compile physical documents. But even a perfect application hits a wall, vanishing into an indefinite backlog. This delay acts as a deliberate rationing mechanism. It's an endurance test, filtering out applicants too destitute to survive months without help. Financial stress consumes your brain's processing power, like a computer running out of RAM. The system piles complex tasks onto the exact people with the least bandwidth. This mental depletion is called cognitive scarcity. They call for an update, but receive conflicting answers every single time. When effort stops producing a result, the brain predictably gives up. That shattered connection is called learned helplessness. And the system worked exactly as designed. 1 in 8 eligible people lose their food stamps purely by failing this procedural maze. But what actually happens to that eligible working parent from the very beginning of the process? The paperwork simply outlasted their endurance, and their formally guaranteed legal rights were quietly erased. We're told the climate crisis is our fault. Just recycle more and drive less. But a complete structural blueprint already exists, built on 4 technologies sitting on the shelf today. First up, plastic. Traditional recycling just degrades the material until it becomes trash, but dropping this specific polymer into a simple acid bath cleanly unzips it. It leaves a pure powder for infinite recycling. It's called PDK plastic. Next, food. We can brew real dairy without a single POW. Engineered microbes produce proteins that are molecularly identical to milk. This precision fermentation uses 99% less water, bypassing the land destruction of animal agriculture. Third, power. Solar panels die at night, so we move the mirrors to orbit. A constellation of space mirrors can focus uninterrupted 24/7 sunlight. It beams power straight to Earth, skipping toxic lithium battery farms entirely. Finally, transport. The ultimate fix isn't electric cars. It's redesigning city geometry around high-speed rail and bicycles. When those are the fastest options, you don't even need to own a car. The technologies to save our biosphere are already fully developed. the climate crisis is no longer a problem of scientific invention. It is purely a test of our collective political willpower.
Treaties can stop a war, but they can't magically erase decades of ingrained hostility between rival citizens. To actually rewire human prejudice at scale, you need the contact effect. Take the founding of CERN. After World War II, physicists from recently warring nations were placed into one shared laboratory. When citizens stay completely isolated within their own borders, it's effortless for the human brain to reduce a foreign population to an abstract enemy. But just throwing rival groups into the same room doesn't fix it. If they just sit side by side or compete, proximity can actually reinforce their prejudices. The contact effect only triggers when rivals are handed a shared, difficult problem and forced to rely on each other as equal peers. As they build something together, their brains stop processing the other person as a hostile flag and start processing them as a necessary teammate. As these bonds multiply through scientists, exchange students, and city planners, they weave a thick layer of diplomacy beneath diplomacy. This dense web makes it practically impossible for leaders to demonize the other nation. So what exactly happened when those physicists were placed into that shared post-war European laboratory? It successfully helped heal a broken continent by turning bitter national rivals into daily, lifelong colleagues. Forget the sci-fi movies. The singularity isn't machines magically waking up. It's a process called recursive discovery. It's a compressed feedback loop where AI continuously designs better versions of itself. Imagine an AI agent tasked with designing a faster computer chip. It starts the scientific method by generating a new structural hypothesis. Then it runs massive simulations to test millions of possible architectures. It analyzes the results, revises its theory, and outputs a highly optimized design. A process that used to take human lifetimes is completed in mere days. But a faster chip is just static hardware. So how does this single output trigger an intelligence explosion? Here's the recursive turn. That highly optimized chip is immediately fed back into the system. It runs and trains an even smarter, more capable version of the AI. Now, the exact same discovery loop runs a second time. Powered by the upgraded hardware, it executes faster and handles vastly more complex simulations. With each cycle, this loop spins faster and tighter, compressing the time between discovery, deployment, and consequence to almost zero. That is the real singularity, a scientific feedback loop collapsing into a single instant. And while it designs better chips, it's simultaneously discovering new batteries, folding proteins, and writing code. The biggest myth in human connection? Believing that because you spoke, communication actually happened. Intention and reception are completely different things. Here are the 4 hidden traps ruining your conversations. First up, the Step 10 error. Clear words will fail if your listener doesn't share your background context. When you start explaining at Step 10 because the backstory feels obvious, you leave people stranded. Next, the counterattack instinct. Most people don't listen to understand. They listen to prepare an argument. Constantly interrupting creates 2 competing monologues fighting for airtime. Instead, pause and arrange your response while they finish. You'll build the safety needed for an actual exchange. Third, the civility trap. Bad faith actors weaponize politeness. They disguise accusations as polite curiosity, just asking questions to exhaust you. Don't fall for the costume. When someone manipulates an exchange, set a strict no-tolerance boundary. Finally, the identity collapse. We instinctively treat critical feedback like a personal attack, but communicative maturity means treating feedback as usable information. This makes admitting you messed up feel like routine maintenance rather than total humiliation, because flawless delivery isn't the goal. Communication happens when you stop using others as an audience for your ego and start building a shared reality together. We treat art like a subjective luxury, just decoration or a weekend hobby. But it is actually a strictly vital cognitive technology. To see how it programs us, take an abstract claim, a just society. First, philosophy clarifies what justice is. Then communication turns that truth into an academic paper. But if those values only live in essays, they are fragile. You cannot feel them. That is where art completes the sequence. It gives truth a sensory body. The pipeline translates those dry words into a physical, lived city square. Justice isn't just an argument anymore, it's an environment. But there is a dangerous vulnerability. Because beauty entirely bypasses your critical reasoning, this exact same pipeline works flawlessly to preserve lives. Slick propaganda and algorithms hijack the nodes, installing empty moods directly into your brain. They make mindless submission feel like a community. That trap is called aesthetic capture. The only defense is to actively design structurally intelligent utopian art. Because citizens cannot organize toward a future they cannot vividly picture. So the public design, media, and architecture you consume today are not just decorations. They are the sensory rehearsals for the civilization we are about to build. Human history is a massive graveyard of utopian ideas. Why? Because we try to skip straight to the finish line without an actual map. So let's look at a concrete dependency chain for rebuilding society, a sequence scaling from the individual to the globe. Phase 1 starts with you, because power magnifies whatever reaches it. An exhausted leader running on ego will just build an exhausted ego-driven institution. You must regulate yourself first. Before making national demands, you have to build a private culture capable of healthy disagreement. Then test new governance systems in small laboratories of 50 people, where a broken interface won't crash a country. Once prototypes work, you scale up to national institutions. Here, you absolutely must secure democratic infrastructure first. Without replacing backroom lobbying with transparent participation, every new economic reform will just be corrupted by the old networks. With domestic stability achieved, society must coordinate globally to govern systems that autonomously take actions and spend money. This is called agentic AI. If we don't govern it now, bad defaults will harden into permanent infrastructure. You don't need to finish a flawless utopia tomorrow. Just find your place and leave the next person a clearer, kinder system.